Greetings. I'm not sure if this thing is working or not. Greetings. I'm going to try this again. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine in the stories I read every day. Greetings, greetings, greetings. Welcome to Storytime at 5 on Facebook Live with Dr. Helen Tinsley. And I'm happy to be here with you again today. And I hope everyone's having a blessed day. And I have 2 stories to read for you today. The first one will always be a more simplistic children's book. And the second one will be a picture book, but a little more complex. So the first one today is Caps for Sale. A Tale of a Peddler, Some Monkeys, and Their Monkey Business. And the author is Esphyr Slobodkina. Caps for Sale. Can someone please let me know through sending a message if I already see that people can see it. Good. Hey, Val and Olivia. Caps for Sale. Caps for Sale. Caps for Sale. Once there was a peddler who sold caps, but he was not like an ordinary peddler carrying his wares on his back. He carried them on top of his head. First, he had on his own checked cap, then a bunch of gray caps, then a bunch of brown caps, then a bunch of blue caps, and on the very, very top, a bunch of red caps. He walked up and down the streets, holding himself very straight so as not to upset his caps. As he went along, he called, "Caps! Caps for sale! 50 cents a cap!" One morning, he couldn't sell any caps. He walked up the street and he walked down the street calling, "Caps! Caps! Caps for sale! 50 cents a cap!" But nobody wanted any caps that morning. Nobody wanted even a red cap. He began to feel very hungry, but he had no money for lunch. "I think I'll go for a walk in the country," said he, and he walked out of town slowly, slowly, so as not to upset his caps. He walked for a long time until he came to a great big tree. "That's a nice place for a rest," thought he. And he sat down very slowly under the tree and leaned back little by little against the tree trunk so as not to disturb the caps on his head. Then he put up his hand to feel if they were very straight. First his own check cap, then the gray caps, then the brown caps, then the blue caps, then the red caps on the very top. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm showing the picture the wrong way. Sorry. I can't see what you see when I show the pictures. They were all there, so he went to sleep and he slept for a very long time. When he woke up, he was refreshed and rested. But before standing up, he felt with his hand to make sure his caps were in the right place. All he felt was his own checkered cap. Uh-oh, something happened. He looked to the right of him. No caps. He looked to the left of him. No caps. He looked in back of him. No caps. He looked behind the tree. No caps. Then he looked up into the tree, and what do you think he saw? This is the time for you boys and girls at home to guess. What do you think that he saw in the tree? Now we're going to find out. On every branch sat a monkey. On every monkey was a gray or brown or blue or a red cap. The peddler looked at the monkeys. The monkeys looked at the peddlers. He didn't know what to do. Finally, he spoke to them. You monkeys, you, he said, shaking a finger at them. You give me back my caps. But the monkeys only shook their fingers back at him and said, tick, tick. This made the peddler angry, so he shook both hands at them. And he said, you monkeys, you give me back my caps. But the monkeys only shook both their hands back at him and said, tick, tick, tick. Now he felt quite angry. He stamped his foot and he said, you monkeys, you better give me back my caps. But the monkeys only stamped their feet back at him and said, tit, tit, tit. By this time, the peddler was really very, very angry. He stamped both his feet and shouted, you monkeys, you must give me back my caps. But the monkeys only stamped both their feet back at him and said, tit, tit, tit. At last, he became so angry that he pulled off his own cap, threw it on the ground, and began to walk away. And what do you think the monkeys did then? But then each monkey pulled off their cap. And all the gray caps, and all the brown caps, and all the blue caps, and all the red caps came flying down out of the tree. So the peddler picked up his caps and put them back on his head. First his own checkered cap, then the brown caps, then the blue caps, then the red caps on the very top. And slowly, slowly, he walked back to town calling, caps, caps for sale, 50 cents a cap. And that is the end. Caps for sale. Again, this is a tale of a peddler, some monkeys, and their monkey business. I hope you enjoyed this story. I want to acknowledge who's here with us today. Hey, Stephanie. We're co-grandmothers. Hi, Val and Olivia, Terry, Mildred. Hi, Mildred. Hi, Daryl. Carlton, I'm glad you got in. And I'm glad y'all are here to join me. And I hope that others that watch the Storytime Live will enjoy the stories that I share. So the next story is a story in honor of Women's History Month. Again, as I've mentioned, March is Women's History Month. And so during this month, we like to highlight the contributions and achievements of women. And so the next story is about another shero of mine. People have heard of her and know things about her, but a lot of people don't know a lot about her. So I think this is an important story. It's a little lengthy, but it is a picture book. and it's about Sojourner Truth, and it's called Only Passing Through, The Story of Sojourner Truth by Anne Rockwell. I think it's important during Women's History Month that we not only enjoy the stories, but we learn some history about historical figures that have been important in the struggle and in the achievements of women. Only Passing Through, The Story of Sojourner Truth. Strangers stared while the auctioneer poked and pointed at the little girl with his stick, showing how tall and strong she was. He promised that since she was only about 9 years old and already so tall, she'd soon be able to do the work of any man. The girl's owner had died, and his property, which included a few slaves, was being auctioned off to pay his debts. Her mother and father weren't being sold, for they were old and sick. No one would want them. They'd been set free to look after themselves. Her father, who had been as tall and strong as a tree, was bent and lame with arthritis. He could hardly walk, let alone work for a living. Young, tall, and strong as she was, no one bid for the slave girl called Isabella at that auction in Kingston, New York, in 1806. The sun settled low in the sky, and still she wasn't sold. Finally, the auctioneer offered to throw in a flock of sheep if someone would just buy the girl so he could call it a day and go home, and then a farmer did. She didn't understand a word her new owner said. He spoke English and she spoke Dutch, as nearly everyone living along the Hudson River did in those days. He whipped her when she didn't understand what she'd been ordered to do. He whipped her so hard that blood flowed down her back. Isabella earned her first words of English with scars that remained all her life. So to the children watching and to the families, there's some difficult concepts in this book. You have to talk to children about it, okay? After 2 years, she was sold to a Dutch-speaking man who owned a tavern down by the river. She eavesdropped on the rough boatmen and slave drivers who came there to eat and drink. Many spoke English. She paid careful attention to their words, memorizing new ones each day. When she turned 13, a neighboring farmer offered the tavern keeper a good price for her. Isabella's new owner was English-speaking, but by now she spoke and understood his language. She liked John Dumont more than her other masters. She was sure he liked her too, for he often told her she was the best bargain he'd ever made. By the time she was 16, Isabella was 6 feet tall and could do the work of any man, just as the auctioneer had promised. She was also old enough to have children who'd be slaves for Dumont. So her master gave her to one of his other slaves, an older man named Thomas, to be his wife. Isabella wouldn't have chosen Thomas for a husband had she been given a choice, but slaves didn't have a choice in such matters. She and Thomas had 4 daughters and a son. Every night, Isabella prayed Dumont wouldn't sell them to an owner who lived far away, as had happened to her brother and sister. Isabella's mother had often told the story of the morning when her little boy and girl had raced from the dark cellar where they and the other slaves lived. They heard the jingling of sleigh bells and were eager to investigate. The stranger driving the sleigh had grabbed the children, shoved them in a box, locked it, and driven off. But he couldn't shut the box tight enough to keep their terrified screams from drowning out the bells as the sleigh raced over bright new fallen snow. To those that just joined, this is the story of Sojourner Truth. Her mother never told the story without breaking down in sobs. Her parents never stopped grieving for their lost children, and their pain became Isabella's own. It was something they passed on to her just as surely as her father passed on his great height and strength. Sometimes she wondered what it would be like not to have to dread such things. When Isabella was alone, she looked to the stars, for that was where her mother had told her God lived. God who looked out for the long lost children, wherever they were, and Isabella too. She often talked to God and believed she heard him answer. Sometimes she'd ask if a day would ever come when she would be free. One day an answer came, not from God, but from John Dumont. In 1825, when Isabella was 28 years old, Dumont told her that he decided to reward her for her hard work by freeing her in a year. She didn't know his offer wasn't as generous as it sounded. In fact, he was required to set her free in 2 years. Slavery was gradually ending in New York. A state law had been passed in 1817, decreeing that most adult slaves were to be set free on the 4th of July, 1827. Dumont knew that, but Isabella didn't. From the day he made his promise, Isabella thought about nothing but her coming Freedom Day. She had a beautiful singing voice and sang out with joy every morning, for each day that passed brought the great one nearer. But then Isabella cut her right hand on the sick and couldn't work in the fields. When her dreamed Freedom Day finally came, Dumont said that since she hadn't done enough work for him in the past year, he figured she owed him another year's worth of work. Isabella was devastated that the master she trusted would betray her. She couldn't allow him to do this. She spent the next few days spinning every last bit of wool that had been sheared from Dumont's sheep. She planned to leave no work undone. She'd leave no reason her children could be punished in her place. Isabella didn't sleep at all the night she finished spinning. Before the sun rose, she walked away from the farm, taking for herself the freedom Dumont had promised her. Sorry. A few miles away lived a couple named Isaac and Maria Van Wagner. Isabella had heard that they believed it was immoral to own slaves. She asked if she could board with them and work for wages whenever she could. The Van Wagner said yes. Dumont came looking for her. He didn't have to look far. He had already guessed where he'd find her. When he demanded that Isabella come back to the farm with him, Isaac Van Wagner knew the law was on Dumont's side. He acted quickly, offering to buy her for $20. Dumont pocketed the money and left. As soon as he was gone, Isaac told Isabella he bought her only so Dumont couldn't take her back. He knew that Isabella would have been cruelly punished for running away, made an example to other slaves. So he bought her even though he knew no human being had the right to own another. Now he was setting her free. Isabella wept with joy. Her dream of Freedom Day had come. It was a few days late, but it had come. Oops. It may have been from Isaac or Maria that Isabella first heard Bible stories. I can't figure out this. She was deeply moved by them, especially the one about Moses leading his people out of bondage in Egypt. He had succeeded. He had set those slaves free. Isabella saw how tragic things had happened to people could be turned into stories that gave strength and inspiration to others. She began to believe that strong words such as those in the Bible had a power as great as any master's whip. The Van Wagner farm wasn't far from Dumont's, so Isabella was able to visit her children. One day she discovered that her 5-year-old son Peter was gone. What she'd long dreaded had happened. Dumont had sold Peter. The man who bought him then sold the child to a plantation owner in Alabama. It was against the law in New York to sell a slave out of state. The man who had sold the little boy knew that, but figured he could get away with it. After all, who was going to stop him? But he didn't know that Van Wagner's had been telling Isabella about many of the laws of the state and country in which she'd been born. She knew that what Peter's new master had done was illegal. She made up her mind to go to court and have her child brought back to New York where he belonged. She found a lawyer who agreed to help her. As she stepped into the courtroom to plead her cause, Isabella felt a strange new sensation. Later, she told people that she felt the power of a nation swelling within her that day in the courthouse. She won. People for miles around spoke of little else but how a former slave had taken a white man to court and won. No one had ever heard of such a thing. Slaves didn't do such things. Women didn't do such things, but Isabella did. Peter was ordered back from Alabama and placed in his mother's care. Isabella found his back covered with bloody wounds from a whip, wounds so much like her own. In 1829, she went to New York City, where she hoped to make enough money to send Peter to school. She heard of a school there that black children could attend. She seen what words written down in books could do. Words in law books had set her and Peter free. Words in the Bible had touched the deepest places in her soul. Even though she couldn't read and write herself, she wanted to be sure Peter learned how. Peter went to school, but in 1841, when he was about 18, he took a job as a sailor on a whaling ship. He expected to be gone about 3 years. He wrote Isabella a few letters from faraway places, then she heard nothing more. She waited, but no letters came. Finally, she believed Peter must be dead. In 1843, Isabella woke from a vivid dream. A voice told her she must leave New York. It said she was meant to travel around the country, telling of her time in bondage, telling people what it meant to be a slave. She had to be a voice for all the other silent slaves still in bondage. It was a powerful call. Isabella was sure it was God telling her to do this. She had only 25 cents, which she put in her apron pocket. She tied her few possessions together in a pillowcase, closed the door behind her, and began walking toward the rising sun. She crossed from Manhattan to Brooklyn on the ferry, and then walked into the green countryside of Long Island. As she walked, memories of her life found words, and many were those she first heard in the Bible. One word was sojourner. Isabella knew it meant someone who was only passing through, staying a while, and then moving on to another place. She now believed that she was meant to be a sojourner, always moving on to spread her message, and she knew she'd never serve any master but the truth. Isabella became a new woman that day. It was as though the life she'd known up till then belonged to someone else. A new one was beginning. The old life had become a tale to tell, a story to bring freedom to others. Her old name belonged to her old life. From that day on, she was never called Isabella again. Her name was Sojourner Truth. She crossed Long Island by ferry to Connecticut. Wherever she went, she worked in fields, cleaned houses, did laundry, and told her story to whoever would listen. On her travels, she'd usually find someone willing to read the Bible aloud to her or write a letter to her children, telling them where she was. She preferred it when children read the Bible to her, for they didn't try to interpret the stories as adults did. She just let the word they just let her listen to the words so that she could decide for herself what meaning they had. She made her way to Northampton, Massachusetts. There she found a community of abolitionists, people who wanted slavery to be made illegal everywhere in the United States. They invited Sojourner to stay and work with them. They noticed how vivid and powerful her images were, how passionate her convictions were, how her great height and plain old-fashioned clothes made for a striking and dramatic presence. Her new friends thought many more people should hear her message. They printed posters advertising a free lecture, a first-hand account of what life as a slave was like. They nailed them to trees and fences and pitched a huge tent at the base of a hill. They hoped people would come from all around to hear Sojourner Truth speak, and they hoped that at least a few people would leave knowing that slavery was wrong. On the evening of the gathering, many people did come, too many. Among the mostly curious or compassionate crowd was a group of young men who'd been drinking whiskey. They carried sticks and shouted that black people were inferior to whites, that no slaves should be free. They'd obviously come looking for a fight and soon threatened to burn down the tent full of people. It was dangerous for Sojourner to be seen, let alone heard, as long as those men were there. She was the very target the drunken bullies were looking for. She hid behind the tent, and her friends told her to stay there until the constable came to arrest the men. Sojourner sat huddled in darkness, waiting for the shouting and fighting to stop. As she sat shaking with terror, she felt ashamed as well. She wasn't being true to her calling. She couldn't stay hidden like that. She had to find the courage to say what was needed. No one noticed her walking up the hill. As soon as she reached the top, Sojourner began to sing. A big white ball of the moon shone behind her, silhouetting her tall, straight figure. Her voice carried down to where people swarmed still fighting. The gang of men ran up the hill, but she went on singing. When they came closer to her, swinging their sticks, she paused in song, gazed steadily at them, then asked them why they wanted to hurt her, for she had never hurt them. To her amazement, they threw down their sticks and promised not to hurt her if she'd only sing some more. So she sang. Finally, she paused and spoke patiently but firmly, as she would to small children. She said she'd sing one more song, but then they must pay attention to what she'd come to tell them. And when she was done speaking, they must go home without any more fighting or arguing. The tough men who'd come to pick a fight that night promised to do what she asked. Sojourner Truth found the strong words for the message she had to deliver. She stood tall and dignified as a queen, while she told many terrible truths about being a slave, of children stolen from their parents, of slaves crowded together in damp and filthy cellars, of masters who died leaving their slaves to the whims of others. She told about her father, a lame old man who froze to death alone in a shack in the woods. She told of beatings whose scars never healed. But Sojourner also told of the triumphs of taking freedom for herself, of using the law to bring her son back. As she spoke, she felt the power her words had, and she knew she'd never be afraid to speak to a crowd again. She made people listen. She made people understand. So when Sojourner Truth asked the question, is this any way to treat a human being? People knew the answer was no. She wandered for many years, a tall, dark figure in plain gray clothes, wearing a white cap on her head. She stopped for a while, say what was needed, and move on. She was a sojourner, only passing through. When people threatened to burn down the place where she planned to speak, she vowed angrily that she'd still be heard speaking from the ashes. Wherever she went, she carried a white silk banner with the words "Proclaim Liberty" embroidered on it. People listened and thought about what they had heard. They told others what Sojourner Truth had said, and her message spread throughout the land. Oh, sorry. And that's the end. And in the back of the book, it gives you a timeline of the activities of Sojourner Truth. So again, this story today is only passing through the story of Sojourner Truth. And the first story was Caps for Sale, a tale of a peddler, some monkeys, and their monkey business. I hope you enjoyed the stories for today. I just want to say, encourage your children to read every day. To the adults watching, it's important for you to read every day. Reading, it's a cliche, but reading is fundamental. The more you read and varied types of literature of different genre, the smarter you get. So let's make sure that we are engaging and indulging our children in reading. I want to say hello to everyone that joined. I appreciate your supporting me during the read-alouds. And again, any children that want to draw a related picture from one of the stories can draw it. Your parents can scan it or snap a picture with your cell phone and upload it to Dr. Helen Tinsley at gmail.com. Dr. Helen Tinsley at gmail.com. Dr. Helen Tinsley at gmail.com. No period after the D, R. And I will showcase it on the show, on the Read Aloud the next day or so. Okay, thank you and God bless. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay well, stay in if you can. And, we can get through this storm together. We're stronger than coronavirus and everything else. I love you and God bless you all. Peace.